The man in super form is Fabiano Caruana, who so far in Norway Chess has scored 3 big victories and 1 draw. And among these 3 victories are big wins against Magnus Carlsen and Alireza Firouzja. In round 5 today he played with the white pieces against Shakhriyar Mamedyarov, and I would like to discuss that game as there are a lot of interesting tactical ideas. Also the big question, as we get to see a passed pawn, whether this passed pawn is going to be a strength or a weakness. I would like to discuss the details with you, but before I do so, I would like to make use of the opportunity to thank everyone for joining the channel. If you haven't subscribed yet, feel free to help the channel grow by becoming a member of this channel. I would really appreciate all your support. Now, let's go to the game, because it's an absolutely fascinating example, as we have the English opening. Fabiano opens with 1 c4. You get to see a very well-known line we have already covered on earlier occasions in this channel. Knight c3, knight f6, knight f3, knight c6, the English opening, the 4 knights variation, and Fabiano goes for the move e4. And Mamedyarov goes for bishop c5, allowing this move knight takes e5, knight takes e5, sacrificing the knight, but after the move d4, white is going to regain the piece. Bishop b4, it's the main move, d takes e5, knight takes e4. And probably you recognize this specific position from the World Championship match between Ding Liren and Jan Nepomniachtchi. It was game 10, really interesting game, but Nepo, after white played the move queen f3, it's the main continuation. Nepo played here knight takes c3, which is the main continuation. After b takes c3, here Nepo came up with a small surprise by dropping back with the bishop to c5, whereas bishop a5, keeping an eye on the pawn on c3, is way more common. But back to the game, because Mamedyarov came up with an even bigger surprise here, as rather than taking on c3, he thought, let's support the knight on e4 by playing the move d5. So the knight cannot be taken, as the knight on c3 is pinned, while if you do take on d5, then the black queen is about to join the game. Black is very active, the queen cannot be taken due to the pin once again. So that is not recommendable, because the pawn on e5 is going to drop very soon. Alternatively, you can capture en passant here, but now the key move, rather than recapturing passively with your knight, you just castle kingside here, and now the knight cannot be taken because of rook e8, and the queen is lost. Fabiano had to recall all his home analysis. He was evidently caught by surprise, but he remembered what to do. He played here the move bishop to e2. That is a very sensible continuation, just preparing to castle as quickly as you can. Now, Mamed had definitely prepared something here. He went for the move d4, so the knight can be taken, but there's a counterattack against the knight on c3. So queen takes e4, d takes c3, castling kingside, and now also black castled here. This is all fine. a3, questioning the bishop on b4, and now obviously if the bishop goes away, then white will be happy to capture the pawn on c3. Despite the fact that it's an isolated double pawn, white is still a very nice pawn up and will consider bringing the bishop into the game to connect the rooks, and I think white can count on an advantage there. So this is the moment, after the move a3, when the bishop is under threat, just to, before removing the bishop away, take on b2 first. That's an excellent decision. Now, of course, you're threatening to take the rook, so white will recapture, and now the bishop comes back to c5. And here you can look at the position. You see that white is having nice bishops, nice pawn on e5. The only drawback is the potential weak pawns. But first things first, white is going to play here the move bishop to d3. And that is a big move, as you're simply threatening checkmate on h7. Only move here is g6. But look what's going to happen now. White had some ideas to include this bishop on b2 into the attack as well, and played here the move e6. Just an incredible shot, with the point that if the bishop captures on e6, now the move queen e5 can be played with huge mating threats on g7 and h8. The only way to prevent the mate is f6, but that allows the move queen takes e6 with check. Very important, there is no time for black to take the bishop on d3, so white is just a very nice piece up. So here we understand the main point of playing the move e6, as white is opening up the diagonal for the bishop as well as preparing to play the move queen e5 with a huge double attack threatening mate and the bishop. But what should black do? This looks like things can go wrong very quickly here, but Mamed, well prepared, play the move queen to e7. This is just a very cool move because the queen is protecting the bishop. So whenever queen e5 is going to be played, there is this move f6. There is no chance for white capturing the bishop. And if you do take on f7 with check, looks dangerous as well. But black is able to consolidate its position by just recapturing with the rook, protecting the queen, and the white queen is not able to reach the long diagonal. Queens will be swapped, and that would be excellent news for black. That's what black is aiming for. Try to trade off pieces and go for an endgame. But white played here interesting move. Rook fe1. Maybe it would have been better to play the other rook, but that's very difficult to see in advance. One of the potential ideas is that maybe black at some point would love to take with the pawn on e6 to open up the f-file for the rook. And together with the bishop, there may come some serious pressure against the pawn on f2. And therefore, this rook on f1 can nicely support the pawn on f2. But understandably, Fabi goes for rook fe1 because there are also cases where the rook on f1 could just be out of play. But okay, let's see. Rook fe1, and still, bishop takes e6 is not a possibility as white has the move queen to e5, renewing the mating threat. And if you play f6 now, thanks to the support of the rook on e1, you're able to capture the bishop anyway. So how is black about to complete its development here? That's the big question, because black is unable to recapture with the bishop on e6, but that means the bishop cannot be developed. And how are you going to bring this rook into the game? Well, interesting solution as black played here the move a5. Excellent idea, with the idea to get the rook to a6 and attack the pawn on e6. And white had to come up with new ideas and played here the move queen to f4. It's a move I really like a lot, because one of the main ideas here for white is if he is allowed to play one more move, there will follow the move bishop f6 to attack the queen. If the queen goes away, then you're able to bring the queen to h6, and together these pieces, they are able to deliver checkmate on g7. That's a very big idea. Mamed played here the move f6 after a long think. This is a very understandable move to close the diagonal, but by playing the move f6, you're basically saying, okay, white, you can keep your pawn on e6. It's going to be very tricky, and we will see whether this pawn will become an asset or a weakness. The alternative, very interesting option here is the move f takes e6, but you're attacking the queen and you're hitting the bishop. With the bishop, you hit the pawn on f2. The queen got to go away, and you do allow black to capture a lot of material. Bishop takes f2, king goes into the corner, and now bishop takes e1. What are you going to play here? Well, you may just recapture with the rook and say, look at my beautiful pieces. There is a lot of pressure along the a1, h8 diagonal, but after king f7, the black king is probably about to run away to the center again. So in that sense, it could be a better idea for white to start giving a check. And now after king f7, queen takes h7 check, king to e8. Now position is just incredibly complex, and understandably neither player wanted to go for this line. But apparently something like bishop g7 with the idea to capture with the bishop on g6 next. The bishop on e1 can be taken next, but the rook may also come to d1 to take away squares from the king on the d file. Well, this is just incredibly complex. I don't dare to say anything wise about this possibility. f6, I believe it's the more human continuation, but the pawn on e6 stays on the board and black will have still difficulties to untangle, to complete its own development. White plays bishop e4. Very nice move with the point that if the pawn is going to be taken, there is bishop d5. And you're going to win material thanks to the pin on the queen. So instead, rather than capturing the pawn, rook a6 was played. So the rook is about to join play, and here another big moment as how should white continue. Apparently the big move here is bishop to d5, trying to keep the pawn supported with a few ideas. If you take on e6, once again, this time it's rook takes e6, and now after rook takes e6, the idea is that you maintain the pin with the bishop on the board. So there you follow up with rook to e1, and white is about to win a lot of material. If you would play a move like c6 instead, trying to get rid of the bishop, then the big problem is that after the bishop goes back to f3, this rook on a6 is quite useless again. It's no longer controlling the pawn on e6. And now still, the pawn on e6 cannot really be taken because of bishop g4 with another huge pressure on the bishop. After f5, the bishop is happy to come back. And look, this pawn is no longer on f6. That means white is about to set up a battery of bishop and queen pressure along the e-file. Things are looking incredibly dangerous. So the best move after bishop d5, and by the way, this was all not played, but it's a very big line. The best move here is to go rook b6 to attack the bishop on b2. But now there is a brilliant idea. Thanks to that bishop on d5, you're able now to take on f6. Rook takes f6, queen takes f6, sacrificing the queen. After queen takes f6, you go e7 with a discovered check. The king gotta go away. It goes to g7, and now a brilliant move. Rather than making a new queen, which is everything but clear after the move bishop takes f2, instead you play here the move e8 knight. Minor promotion with a fork. You're regaining the material, and after the king goes away, you have knight takes f6, rook takes f6, and white is an exchange up. Just be careful that you don't give the material back, allowing bishop takes f2. But after rook a2, I think that white has very good winning chances. Was all not played in the game, but I believe this is the critical line, and you see how problematic that pawn on e6 is for black. Instead, Fabi played here rook a d1, bringing the rook into the game. But here, black thought, let's just try to trade off pieces with the move rook d6, offering the exchange of rooks on the d-file. Rook takes d6, bishop takes d6, and now another difficult decision to make, where to go with the queen. You could go back to c1 with the idea to overprotect the pawn on a3, so then black is unable to take that pawn. Note that the pawn on e6 is still not a serious issue because of bishop d5 ideas with the same pin as before. But obviously the queen is not that happy on c1. So instead, Fabi wanted to keep its queen more active. Played here the move queen to h4. And now, very important idea by black, playing the move c6. Taking away the d5 square from the bishop. So the bishop got to go away. But the big question is, where do you go with the bishop? And here I think Fabi made a serious error by dropping back with the bishop to d3. Why is this a mistake? Well, after bishop takes a3, there is the move queen takes a3, and your bishop is under threat. This is what happened in the game. Now, just we quickly go back to the moment where bishop d3 was played, as in my opinion, bishop to b1 would be a much better idea, with the point that if you take on a3, the bishops are getting exchanged, and now the bishop is no longer hanging. You can push your pawn to e7, hitting the rook. Now the pawn is a really strong force within white's position. After rook e8, the only way to block the pawn is queen takes f6, and white has an overwhelming advantage. Therefore, the pawn should not be taken on a3. Maybe bishop takes e6 is a better possibility, but now the key idea is to play c5, hitting the bishop, another pawn sacrifice. If the bishop takes, the bishop comes to a2, reaches this diagonal from a different angle. Bishop takes a2, rook takes e7, bishop takes e7. Very complicated position with the rook, bishop, and 2 pawns for the queen. But the black king is still quite vulnerable. So this is still quite balanced. Back to the game. After bishop d3, take on a3, queen takes. You got to do something about that bishop, because after the move e7, there is rook e8. And now the problem is this pawn is hanging, and also the bishop on d3. No time to play e7. Queen g3 was played in the game to protect the bishop, and now the move rook e8 was played. So black is going after that pawn on e6. Very understandable, though it should be said that something like f5 would have been a very nice idea to block this bishop, and now you have ideas to get the queen back into defense, hitting the rook in the meantime, and then if the queen can land on f6, the black king is absolutely safe, and very soon that pawn on e6 will be wrapped up. Rook e8 is interesting, but does allow the move bishop takes g6. That is a big move. You cannot take the bishop. First of all, the queen on a3 is hanging, but queen takes g6 is even better, because if the king goes away, it's queen takes e8, winning the rook with check and much more. While in case of king f8, it's queen f7 with checkmate, thanks to the help of that passed pawn. Therefore, the bishop should be neglected, and you may consider taking the queen first, but then the idea of Fabio was to play move bishop f7 in between check, king g7, h6, g3, and this is still very unclear. Is this pawn strong, or are black's pawns on the queen side even more threatening? I believe that still this position is very interesting, but probably should end up in a draw. Instead, Mamed wanted to get rid of that pawn on e6, played here just the move rook takes e6. That is such a cool move, with the point that if you do take the queen, rook takes e1, it's back rank mate. If you do take the rook on e6, now you got to be very precise. It's almost back rank mate, but not with the move queen a1, as now white still has the move bishop b1, resolving the check and having this counter check against the black king. Instead, queen c1 will lead to checkmate, and that is just very simple. So therefore, the only move to keep the game going here for white is the move bishop d3 with check and avoiding the exchange of queens. King h8 played, and now obviously you can exchange rooks, but that will only help black to untangle. So therefore, the move rook d1 was played. Black is a pawn up and will try to consolidate its position with the move queen to d6. That is just a very nice idea. White keeps the queens on the board, and black goes queen e7, intending rook e1 at some point, and therefore white decided to play here the move bishop f1, so that rook e1 will never come with check. If you go rook e1, you can just take. As I said, it's not a check, it's queen takes f6, and white is about to win the game and the bishop. So black played rook e5, consolidating the rook. That's a nice move, so that after white creates some luft for its king, there is the move bishop e6. And you see that black seems to be very well in control now. Maybe something like h5 with the idea to bring the pawn to h6 may cause some problems for the black king later on. But white instead played here the move rook to d4, and now black played the move rook to e1. Very understandable, because the bishop is pinned. White played queen c3, attacking the rook. The bishop went back to g8 to support the king very soon, and most importantly at the moment now the rook is protected by the queen. White played queen to d2, and now the queen comes to e5. So step by step black is trying to take over control in the center. White goes rook d8, pinning the bishop on g8. There are no immediate threats, but now things are getting really interesting. Black played the move queen a1 with the idea to win the bishop. What should white do? And Fabi lost track here. He could have sacrificed the bishop with the move king h2, getting out of the pin. After rook takes f1, there is the idea to take on g8. And now after king takes g8, queen d8 check, the black king is unable to run away. If you go king f7, it's queen d7 check. After king g6, queen to e8. If the king tries to run away to the other side, now the key move is the move g4, with the idea that after king takes g4, there's queen e4 check, and if you start with the move king to f4, queen e3 check, king takes g4, queen e4, we get the same position anyway. You may go king h5, but after queen takes h7, it's just a repetition of moves. Black cannot avoid the repetition here. So that would have enabled white to save the game. Very difficult to spot, and of course you have to calculate very precisely. But instead, Fabi played here the move queen d3. He wanted to keep the bishop defended, but it does allow the move queen b1, and that's very annoying because you do offer the exchange of queens, and the queen is unable to retain control over the bishop on f1. If you do trade of queens, this endgame is absolutely hopeless because black does have an extra passer on the a file. If you try to catch that pawn, there's king g7, so that the bishop is able to move again. And after rook takes a5, now it's bishop takes c4 with a deadly skewer on the back rank, winning the bishop on f1. So white is desperate here, needs to do something, doesn't want to allow rook takes f1 to come with check, doesn't want to allow the exchange of queens. Played here the move rook takes g8, but this time after king takes g8, queen d8 check, king g7, queen c7, king comes to g6, queen to g3, king f5, queen h3. The king is able to run away to the other side of the board because thanks to the cooperation of queen and rook, a lot of vital squares for the black king have been covered. Always there are possibilities to interfere with these pieces somewhere on a diagonal or on a file. So white can just keep on giving a few more checks, but very soon it will just be over. The king went to d7, queen f7, check, king c8, and now the king is just about to hide somewhere on a7 or maybe on b6, and then the checks are over. White tried here to move king to h2, funny moment, because I think black could just have taken the bishop, but maybe Mamed just didn't want to give white the possibility of giving him some more checks on the e-file. Anyway, the move played by Shakhriyar Mamedyarov is absolutely good enough. He played queen e4, centralizing the queen, and I like this move because the bishop is still unable to move. It will just be taken. After the move, queen to g8, king c7, white decided to keep the bishop defended, but after queen to d3, now of course you are not allowed to move the bishop, so black is about to take with check on the next move, and after queen f7, there is the move king b6, and black won as Fabiano resigned here at this point. Just his first loss of the tournament, and because of this loss, well, he is still in the lead, but he lost world's #2 spot as Hikaru Nakamura managed to win his game against Ariantari and is now currently world's #2. You see how close are all these players fighting for the second spot on the world ELO ranking list. Anyway, I thought this was a very instructive game, showing you a lot of tactical ideas in the middle game. Even in the end game, there were quite a lot of sharp tactical ideas, and you see that such a passed pawn has a big impact on the game. In certain cases, it's really strong. In other cases, it's just a weakness, can be wrapped up, and you see how efficiently Mamedyarov managed to convert that advantage. I hope you enjoyed watching this game. I hope to see you soon again, and don't forget to subscribe. Thank you. Bye bye.